I sat across from Lucas at our usual coffee spot, the one with the burnt espresso and fake plants in the window. He always chose it, maybe because it felt like neutral ground, or maybe because the barista knew his name and didn't judge when he asked for water in a coffee cup. He was already talking before I'd even sat down fully, voice animated, hands slicing the air like a motivational speaker. 18 grand, Elena. That's it. Just to get the equipment lease signed and the storefront deposit down. It's basically a guarantee. I've got everything lined up this time. This business, it's different. Different. He always said that. Different from the smoothie stand, the crypto coaching service, the luxury pet accessories website. Each venture left a trail of unpaid debts and borrowed money he never repaid, though his optimism remained untouchable. I used to admire that about him, back when I thought it came from resilience instead of denial. I wrapped my hands around my paper cup. The heat bit at my fingers, grounding me. Lucas, I said gently, I've looked at the numbers and I have to say no. He blinked, like I'd spoken in another language. No to what part? To all of it. I'm not lending you $18,000. There was a beat of silence. The hum of the milk frother in the background filled it like static. His smile wavered, then rebounded. It's not a loan, really. It's an investment. I mean, you'd get your money back and then some. I'll cut you in. No, I repeated more firmly now. Not a loan. Not an investment. I'm not putting money into this. He laughed a little, that forced chuckle he used when he was trying not to show how pissed he was. You've always been the numbers person. I get it, you're cautious. But I've got a real shot here. You can't just pull the ladder up behind you. I looked him in the eye. This isn't about caution. It's about pattern recognition. Every single time, it ends the same. I'm not enabling that anymore. He leaned back, the smile now gone, his mouth set in a thin line. So that's it? No faith in family? No support for your brother-in-law? I didn't flinch. Support doesn't mean funding another failure. It means telling you the truth when no one else will. You don't need capital, Lucas. You need accountability. His eyes narrowed. Daniel wouldn't agree. The mention of my husband was a weak attempt at leverage, one I'd anticipated. Daniel respects that I handle the finances. He trusts my judgment. Lucas scoffed and pushed his chair back abruptly, the legs scraping against the tile. You know what, Elena? I thought you were different. Thought you actually believed in people. I do, I said quietly. But belief isn't blind. And trust is earned. He stormed out without another word, leaving his untouched cup and the bitter aftertaste of disappointment. I sat there a while longer, not because I was unsure, but because I needed to breathe through the ripple of guilt that always followed when you had to say no to someone who wore your family's name. I drove home with the windows cracked, letting the wind dull the static still buzzing under my skin. The sky was pale blue, calm, like it didn't know Lucas's world had just shifted, or maybe like it didn't care. I parked, stepped into our house, and found Daniel in the kitchen sorting through mail. I told him what happened. He didn't say much. Just nodded slowly and offered a non-committal. You did what you thought was right. No hug, no obvious relief. But he didn't argue either. And I took that as a quiet sign of agreement, or at least resignation. I thought that was the end of it. I went to work the next day, did my shift in the ICU where real problems existed, problems with ventilators, bleeding that wouldn't stop, hearts beating too fast or not at all. I helped a woman breathe again after her chest collapsed. I comforted a son who watched his father fade. I made dozens of life or death decisions. So by the time I came home, Lucas's plea felt small again. Contained. Finished. I didn't tell anyone else in the family. I figured Lucas might vent to them, spin his version of events, but I'd given him the truth without anger. That should have been enough. I'd spoken calmly, respectfully. I'd set a boundary, not lit a fire. But families are funny like that. They say silence is safety. I believed that once. But silence in a family? That's usually just the inhale before the explosion. I didn't realize, then, that saying no wasn't the end. It was the fuse. And someone somewhere had already lit it. I knew something was off the moment Daniel told me we were invited to his parents' house for dinner on a Tuesday of all days. Just casual, he said with a shrug, but his tone was careful, too neutral. The way someone talks when they're hoping you won't ask follow-up questions. I asked anyway, "Is Lucas going to be there?" Daniel hesitated, and that half-second pause told me everything. "No, I don't think so." That wasn't exactly reassuring. Still, I agreed to go. If they were going to push, I wasn't afraid to push back, politely but firmly. I'd done the hard part already. I'd said no. This dinner, I figured, was just the residue. The awkward glances, the half-hearted guilt trips, maybe a passive-aggressive jab from his mother. I'd handled worse in the ICU. The moment we walked in, I knew it wasn't casual. The dining room table was set like it was Thanksgiving, cloth napkins, wine glasses, a roast in the oven. Everyone was already there. Daniel's parents, his sister Cara, his younger brother Nate, even Aunt Lydia, who usually hated weeknights out. Everyone, except Lucas. They greeted me with sugary smiles, kissed my cheek, complimented my hair. I accepted each with a smile of my own, but my stomach tightened. This wasn't dinner. It was theater. We sat. Chit-chat followed. Weather, local news, a brief debate about some new Italian place opening downtown. No one mentioned Lucas or money, and for a few moments, I almost let myself believe maybe I'd misread it. Then Daniel's father, George, tapped his knife gently against his glass and cleared his throat. "So, we wanted to talk, Elena, about Lucas." And just like that, the curtain rose. I took a sip of water, steadying myself. "Okay." We had a little vote, his mother said brightly, like she was announcing a new game. "A family vote." I tilted my head slightly. "A vote?" "Yes," she said, beaming. "We've all discussed it. And we've come to the conclusion that it's in everyone's best interest for you and Daniel to lend Lucas the money." I blinked. "A vote to lend someone else my money?" Nate chuckled nervously. "It wasn't personal. Just democratic. Democratic." I almost laughed. "How many people voted?" Everyone except Daniel raised their hands, even Aunt Lydia. I looked at Daniel, who was staring at his plate like the peas were fascinating. "Did you vote?" I asked him. He didn't look up. I didn't say anything. That silence, his silence, rang louder than anything else in the room. "You all decided," I repeated slowly, "that I should lend $18,000 to Lucas, against my judgment, because you outnumber me?" "It's not against your judgment," his mother rushed to say. "It's just that we all think it's the right thing. Lucas has potential, and I have money I finished for her. That's what this is about." George leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Elena, sweetheart, you've always been the responsible one. We just figured." "No," I interrupted, my voice still calm but firmer now. "You didn't figure anything. You decided. Without me." The air in the room shifted then. The pretense started to crack. "Daniel," I said, turning to him, "do you support this?" He finally looked up. "I just want peace." "Peace? At what cost? My stability? My boundaries?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope I'd brought, just in case. I hadn't expected to use it tonight, not so soon. But something in me had known. "What's that?" Cara asked, her fork halfway to her mouth. I placed it in front of Daniel. "Why don't you open it?" He hesitated, then slid the papers out. His eyes moved quickly, then froze. "Elena." "Read it," I said evenly. He did. Slowly. The room quieted as he read aloud the contents, a copy of a quitclaim deed in my name only. And beneath it, a notarized amendment to our prenuptial agreement, separating my finances from his. Legal. Final. Ironclad. Gasps broke the silence. George looked like someone had slapped him. His wife covered her mouth. Cara leaned in, squinting at the papers like they might morph into something less damning. "What is this?" she whispered. "This," I said, folding my hands, "is my line in the sand. My name is on that house, not Daniel's. Our accounts are no longer joint. My assets are mine." Nate spoke first. "Wait, you did this because of Lucas?" "No." I did this because of all of you. Because you assumed access to something that was never yours. You tried to make a financial decision for me, using family as leverage. That's not democracy. That's coercion. Daniel stared at me, stunned. You never told me. I didn't need to, I said. You made your choice the moment you stayed silent. That silence cost you something. I stood, folding the envelope back into my bag. Elena, please, his mother started. I'm not angry, I said, meaning it. I'm just done pretending your votes determine my life. From now on, you don't get to vote. And with that, I walked out, past the linen napkins, the roast they wouldn't eat, and the faces frozen in a tableau of stunned silence. Funny thing about votes. They only count when you let them. I thought I might feel a sense of triumph walking away from that dinner table. But all I felt was a deep, resonant stillness. Not calm, not yet. Just the kind of stillness that comes after an earthquake, when everything has shifted, but the dust hasn't quite settled. Daniel didn't come after me. Not that night. Not the next morning. He left early, claiming a work meeting. I didn't ask where. So I waited. I waited until the weekend, when I knew there'd be another spontaneous family moment. Sure enough, Saturday afternoon, Daniel mentioned his parents were having everyone over for a cookout. No pressure, he said, but he avoided my eyes when he said it. He knew better than to ask outright. I told him I'd come. But this time, I brought the envelope. The same manila folder, creased now from being opened and closed, handled and rechecked. I slid it into my tote bag like I was packing sunscreen or a paperback. Casual. Intentional. When we arrived, the air was thick with forced cheer. Burgers on the grill, beer in hand, George offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Kara waved from the patio. Nate was already 2 drinks in, laughing a little too loudly. No one brought up the last dinner. Not at first. I waited. I was patient. They wanted this to slide back into normalcy. But I hadn't gone to all the effort of protecting myself to play nice now. It wasn't long before someone mentioned Lucas. He's just stressed, Kara said, cutting into her burger. He feels like everyone's ganged up on him. Funny, I replied, he wasn't even there at the family vote. That stopped the conversation cold. Daniel cleared his throat. Let's not do this here. I looked at him, really looked. Then when? Everyone went quiet again, the clink of forks on plates filling the silence like awkward percussion. I reached into my bag and set the envelope on the table. This time, I didn't hand it to Daniel. I placed it in the center, for everyone to see. What is that? Lydia asked. You all saw the deed and prenup amendment, I said, my voice calm but direct. But I thought you should have a copy for your records, since you like to hold votes on my finances. I opened the envelope and laid out the papers one by one. The quitclaim deed to the house, signed and filed. The prenup amendment notarized. I'd even included a spreadsheet showing a timeline of when I made the changes, dated before Lucas's request. Before the family vote. Before the manipulation. Wow, Nate muttered. You really weren't bluffing. No, I said, locking eyes with him. I wasn't. There was a weight to the moment. A tangible shift. Like suddenly, they realized I wasn't just the responsible one. I wasn't just Daniel's wife. I was someone who prepared. Someone who planned. Kara stared at the papers. When did you do all this? Right after Lucas's last business failed, I said. When he borrowed money from you and from Nate. Nate's head jerked up. You knew about that? I had a feeling. He always plays the same game. And Daniel wouldn't talk about it, but he never denied it either. So I started protecting myself. George rubbed a hand over his face. Elena, no one wanted this to get ugly. I raised a brow. You thought a vote to spend $18,000 of my money behind my back wasn't already ugly? He flinched. Good. Daniel finally spoke, but his voice was weary, distant. You could have told me you were doing all this. I could have, I agreed. But then you would have tried to talk me out of it. And I needed protection, Daniel. From Lucas. From your silence. From the idea that loving someone means letting them wreck your future. He looked down at his hands. No denial. No apology. Just that empty stare. And then, for the first time, Kara leaned forward. Her voice was soft. Can I keep a copy of that? I looked at her, confused. Why? She hesitated. Because Lucas borrowed 10 grand from me. Said it was for licensing fees for the bakery. But I think I know. He used it to pay off something else. I never saw a receipt. He stopped updating me after 2 weeks. My heart beat faster. You didn't tell anyone? I was embarrassed, she said, her eyes glassy. He made it sound like an investment. Like I'd be in on the ground floor. Nate swore under his breath. He told me it was for inventory. Said he just needed a short bridge loan. He still owes me 5 grand. The admissions kept coming. Aunt Lydia mentioned something vague about a gift that turned into a request. George muttered about covering Lucas's back taxes once. And just like that, the room cracked wide open. Lucas hadn't just asked me. He'd built a pattern. A chain of debts strung through the family like Christmas lights no one wanted to admit were broken. I sat back and let the silence stretch. For once, I wasn't the only one holding the truth. They'd tried to vote me into submission. But now they were facing the aftermath of their own silence. And I, finally, had nothing left to prove. Lucas arrived late, like always, with that swagger in his step and a grin too wide for the room he walked into. I watched him from the patio as he crossed the yard toward the table, sunglasses on despite the fading sun, acting like he was stepping into a celebration instead of a reckoning. He had no idea what he was walking into. Hey, he called out, spreading his arms like a returning hero. What did I miss? Everyone exchanged glances. George stood awkwardly. Lydia sipped her wine like she wanted to disappear into the glass. Daniel didn't move. I sat perfectly still, letting the envelope of documents speak for me, still open on the table like a quiet witness to the chaos beneath the surface. Lucas flopped into a chair beside Nate and reached for a beer from the cooler without waiting to be offered one. This all for me? He joked. You didn't have to throw a party just 'cause I'm a little late. Nate didn't laugh. Lucas took a swig and glanced at the papers. What's this? Game night? Kara folded her arms across her chest. No, Lucas. It's Elena's financial paperwork. He squinted at her. Why would we be passing that around? Because, I said, locking eyes with him, this family tried to vote on what to do with my money. Lucas's smirk faltered. What? They had a vote, I continued, to decide if Daniel and I should give you $18,000. Without me, while you were conveniently absent. Lucas looked around, laughing nervously. You're kidding, right? Not kidding, George said, voice tight. It was a mistake. We shouldn't have done it. Lucas blinked, thrown off by the rare admission. Wait, so? I thought we were all good. No, Kara said sharply. We're not good. He turned to her. What's your problem? She stood up slowly, her chair scraping the deck. Her voice shook, but her words were precise. You stole from me. Lied to me. You told me the $10,000 was for bakery licensing fees, but I found out the business you listed on the paperwork doesn't even exist. Lucas paled. Kara, come on, that was a misunderstanding. I was consolidating things, that's all. You know I'm good for it. You said that 6 months ago, she snapped. I've seen nothing but excuses since. Nate jumped in, slapping his palm against the table. And me. Don't forget me, Lucas. 5 grand. Gone. Just need it for a week, remember that. Lucas sat back, suddenly quiet. His charm was peeling, and what was underneath wasn't confidence, it was panic. I had to pick up extra shifts, Kara said, her voice trembling. I covered for you because I thought you were trying. But you're not trying. You're using us. Lucas's gaze darted toward Daniel like he was searching for rescue. Tell them, man. Tell them we're close to something real. You know we are. Daniel didn't speak. And that silence, that same silence he wore like armor, spoke volumes. Lucas's face contorted with confusion, maybe even betrayal. You're not gonna say anything? Still nothing. Lucas looked at me next, like maybe I would crack, maybe I'd feel sorry for him. You know I'm not a bad guy, Elena. I've just had bad luck. Bad luck isn't what drains a family, I said softly. Lies do. I watched him deflate, slowly realizing he'd lost control. His charisma, his distractions, his sweet talking, it didn't work here anymore. The air felt different now. Thinner. Heavier. The truth had rearranged everything. "You all think I'm some scammer," he muttered, standing abruptly. "Fine. I won't ask for anything again. I was just trying to build something for myself." "You built it on all of us," Kara said. He looked around one last time, waiting for someone, anyone, to argue. But no one did. He left without another word. After the door clicked shut behind him, the silence lingered. No one reached for their drinks. No one made a joke to lighten the air. We all just sat there, staring at what was left behind. The documents. The lies. The years we'd let him get away with it. "I should have spoken up earlier," Nate admitted finally. "I thought I was the only one. Thought I'd look stupid." "You're not stupid," I said. "You trusted someone who knew exactly how to take advantage of it." Kara nodded. "He always made it seem like we were part of something special. That if we just gave a little more, waited a little longer, it'd all turn around." George sighed. "We enabled him. All of us. I didn't correct him, though I wanted to. Because some of us tried not to. Some of us said no. And instead of being heard, we were voted against. But I let it go. This wasn't about blame anymore. This was about acknowledgement. About facing the truth, even if it came late." Daniel still hadn't said a word. I didn't expect him to, not yet. Something was shifting behind his eyes. And whatever came next, I knew I couldn't trust his silence anymore. Not after what it cost all of us. But for now, I sat in the truth. I let it settle around us like dusk. The dominoes had started to fall. And I was finally done pretending I hadn't seen it coming. I didn't expect the message from Kara that night. The house was dark except for the kitchen light, where I sat alone, stirring chamomile tea I didn't really want. Daniel had gone straight to bed without a word, slipping under the covers like he was hoping to disappear. I let him. I had no desire to lie beside someone whose silence had become more cutting than anything Lucas ever said aloud. My phone buzzed just after 11. "Kara. Can we talk?" "Just us." I stared at the screen for a moment, considering. I was exhausted, wrung out, emotionally hollow. But something in the way she worded it, "just us," struck a chord. There was something she wasn't saying. Something that wouldn't wait. "Come over," I texted back. 15 minutes later, she was at my door. No makeup, no smile, her face washed pale in the porch light. She looked smaller somehow. Not fragile, just stripped down. She stepped inside and I handed her a blanket and a cup of the tea I hadn't touched. We sat on the couch in the hush of the living room, the only sounds the tick of the clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. "I owe you an apology," she said, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "For going along with the vote. For not saying anything sooner." "You weren't the only one," I said gently. "No," she murmured, but I knew something was off. I let myself believe if I just kept supporting him, it would make up for everything else. I watched her closely. "What do you mean?" Kara hesitated. She took a long sip of tea, set it down, and looked me in the eye. "Elena, Lucas didn't run that fake crypto business alone." I sat up straighter, pulse quickening. "What are you talking about?" She swallowed. "Daniel was in on it. They called it TruePoint Technologies. Said it was blockchain consulting. But it was fake. All of it. They set up a fake website, fake invoices, even paid someone to pose as a client once. It was all just a front to get investors." My stomach dropped. "Investors?" She nodded slowly. "Family, friends, people from church. But most of the money came from one place, your joint savings." I stared at her, unable to speak for a moment. "That can't be right. I would have seen the withdrawals." Lucas bragged once about how Daniel handled the boring part. Said it was genius how he funneled things. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now. I stood abruptly, walking to the kitchen to steady myself. I gripped the counter and tried to keep my breathing even. Daniel. Not just complicit, but active. He hadn't just let Lucas manipulate the family. He'd helped him do it. With my money. Kara followed, her voice quieter now. "I know this is a lot. But when I saw your paperwork today, how prepared you were, I thought, Maybe you should know the rest before you get blindsided. I turned to face her. How long has this been going on? She hesitated. At least a year. Maybe longer. I think it ended when they ran out of people to fool. And Daniel never said a word. Never even hinted. Her silence was confirmation enough. I moved past her into the hallway, flipping the light on in my office. My filing cabinet was there, locked, organized, methodical. I grabbed the joint account statements from last year and began flipping through them, heart pounding. Large transfers labeled as tech consultation, strange ATM withdrawals in cities neither of us had traveled to. I hadn't looked too closely back then. I trusted him. I handled the big things, and Daniel handled the petty logistics. That was the deal. I laughed bitterly under my breath. The petty logistics were how he got away with it. Kara hovered in the doorway. I'll help you, if you want. I kept emails, texts, stuff that felt weird at the time, but I didn't question it. I met her gaze. I want everything. She nodded. The betrayal stretched wider than I had imagined. This wasn't about a brother-in-law asking for money. This was about a husband I thought I could trust using our marriage as a mask for fraud. I'd fought so hard to protect my finances, but I hadn't thought to protect my trust. I sat back down at my desk and opened a new folder on my laptop. Evidence, I named it. Plain. Sharp. Final. Kara watched me begin to upload files, her eyes filled with remorse. I'm so sorry, Elena. Don't be, I said, scanning through transaction histories. You didn't betray me. I heard movement upstairs, the creak of the bedroom floorboards. Daniel was probably awake now, wondering where I was. But for once, I didn't care. I wasn't afraid of what I'd find anymore. Because the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was not knowing how deep it went. Now, I intended to find out. Every last piece. Every hidden transfer. Every lie that wore my name. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, but because my mind refused to rest until the puzzle lay flat on the table, all the edges aligned. Betrayal creates a kind of insomnia, but it also sparks clarity. Somewhere between the second cup of coffee and the fourth printed bank statement, my sorrow transformed into resolve. By sunrise, the office floor was covered in papers. Statements, screenshots, and emails from Kara. I sat cross-legged in the middle, highlighter in hand, mapping out every transaction I hadn't noticed before. The numbers jumped out now, patterns I had overlooked in the day-to-day rhythm of marriage. It was almost embarrassing how thorough Daniel had been. Meticulously labeled expenses, all of them appearing legitimate unless you looked deeper. But once I knew what to search for, the truth lit up like blood in ultraviolet. There were credit cards I never applied for, two, to be exact. Opened under my name with subtle variations on our shared address. He used our old mailing box number for one. I called the companies and, after long waits and a painful number of security questions, confirmed the worst. Not only were they real, but both were nearly maxed out. He'd used my name to take out over $14,000 in revolving credit. One card funded a series of payments to a graphic design firm, branding development, the notes said. Another paid for targeted ads on social media platforms, one's linked to TruePoint Technologies. I recognized the company name from Kara's texts. The site was gone now, but the trail remained. And then there were the forged invoices. Kara had sent me 2 PDFs she'd found in an old email thread. At first glance, they looked professional. Company logo, invoice numbers, tech consulting fees. But the emails they were attached to had typos, mismatched signatures, strange gaps in communication. I cross-checked one invoice number with our bank records and found a deposit into Daniel's personal account for the exact amount, labeled as a repayment, to make it look legitimate. This was no small scheme. It was a web, and I was the thread holding it together, unknowingly, unwillingly. By the time I heard Daniel's footsteps in the hallway, I'd already started a binder. Labeled tabs. Plastic sleeves. Evidence. He stopped in the doorway, blinking at the explosion of paperwork around me. What's all this? I looked up, the calm in my voice practiced. The truth. He stepped in cautiously, eyeing the documents. Elena, listen, I held up a hand. No. You don't get to talk until I'm done. He stood still, lips pressed together. I took a deep breath. You opened 2 credit cards in my name. You forged invoices for fake tech services. You used our joint savings to fund a shell business with your brother. And you never once told me. Daniel paled. It wasn't like that. Lucas needed help. We were going to build something real. I didn't mean for it to get out of control. Lucas didn't build anything, I snapped. He used people. You helped him. And then you stood there while your family tried to bully me into giving him more. I didn't know what to say, he said quietly. I knew you'd find out eventually, and I thought, maybe if it worked, I could pay it back before it got worse. But it did get worse, I said. And you let it. You didn't see me as your wife, Daniel. You saw me as a backup plan. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left for him to say that could undo the choices he'd made. I pointed to the papers. I've documented everything. I'll be filing reports with both banks. I've already started speaking with an attorney. His eyes widened. You're divorcing me? I didn't answer right away. I stood and looked him dead in the eye. I protected myself because I knew something wasn't right. You just proved me right. I thought we were in this together, he murmured. No, I said, voice like steel. You and Lucas were in something together. I was just the bank account. He sank into the chair across from me, staring at the mess of evidence like it was someone else's life. I watched him shrink. Not just from guilt, but from exposure. This was what accountability looked like. I turned away and continued sorting documents. I wasn't doing it for him, or even for me entirely. I was doing it for the version of me that trusted without proof, that believed a partner would never use her. She deserved justice. She deserved freedom. And she was finally getting it. I didn't need Daniel to explain why he did it. I understood enough. He was a man who confused partnership with possession, who thought silence bought time. But silence doesn't shield you from the truth. It only delays the reckoning. And mine had arrived with receipts. I didn't expect to accept the invitation. Another family dinner, this time at George and Elaine's house again, as if nothing had happened. No one mentioned Lucas. No one mentioned the last dinner where I'd laid out legal proof that I, and only I, owned our home. It felt like they were hoping we could just stitch everything back together with pot roast and polite smiles. But I said yes. Not because I believed we'd all suddenly heal over shared side dishes, but because I had one more piece to place on the table. The truth. The whole of it. This wasn't just about money or fake businesses anymore. This was about betrayal. About a marriage that had become a shell built on secrets. Daniel drove us. The silence between us was thick and hard-edged. He hadn't asked what I planned to do tonight. Maybe he was hoping I'd let it go, or maybe he was just afraid to hear the answer. The moment we walked through the door, I felt it again, that hush beneath the surface, like everyone was waiting for me to either smile or detonate. George greeted me with a half-hearted chuckle, Elaine gave me a brittle hug, and Kara looked like she hadn't slept. Nate gave me a quick nod, then turned away. Dinner was chicken marsala and steamed vegetables. No one said much as we passed around dishes and filled plates. I played along for a while, chewing slowly, smiling softly, letting them believe we were settling into something resembling peace. And then I stood up. Forks paused midair. Conversations died in their throats. I reached into my bag and pulled out another folder, this one thicker, heavier. It hit the table with a sound that made Elaine flinch. Elena, Daniel said quietly, already panicking. I'm not here to cause a scene, I said, voice even. I'm here to explain something to all of you. I opened the folder and spread the pages out like a final exam. Bank records. Screen captures of wire transfers. Copies of emails between Daniel and Lucas. Credit card statements in my name I never opened, all with charges tied to TruePoint Technologies. And finally, a timeline that laid everything bare, when the cards were opened, when the money was taken, how it was moved, and where it went. I thought this all started with a loan, I said, looking around the table. But it didn't. Lucas didn't just ask for money, he took it. Through lies and manipulation. And he didn't do it alone. George set down his fork. What are you saying? I'm saying, I continued, I study on him, that your son, my husband, worked with Lucas to create a fake business. They funneled money through it. My money. He opened credit cards in my name. They created forged invoices to make it look legitimate. And while I was working night shifts and managing our bills, they were playing startup fantasy with our future. A long silence stretched. Elaine reached for her wine glass, hands trembling. Daniel stood slowly. Elena, we can talk about this later. No, I said sharply, cutting him off. We're talking about it now. Because I want your family to know the truth before they decide who to believe. I turned to Kara. Remember when you said you felt ashamed for trusting Lucas? Don't. He tricked you because you believed in him. Just like I believed in Daniel. Her eyes glossed over with tears. I pointed to the email printouts. Here's proof Daniel helped Lucas secure funds under false pretenses. Here's where he used our joint savings without telling me. And here's where he let me sit in front of all of you and be told, with a smile, that I should give Lucas even more. Daniel's face had gone pale. I didn't mean to hurt you, he whispered. But you did, I said. And not just me. You hurt everyone here by standing next to Lucas while he drained us all. You let him lie, and you stayed quiet. George leaned back in his chair, stunned. Daniel, is this true? Daniel looked down. It got out of control. I didn't know how to fix it. You start by not hiding it, Nate said bitterly. The room was no longer quiet. It buzzed with disbelief, shame, regret. The paper trail I laid out had done its job. There were no questions left. No excuses. Just the raw, unedited version of what really happened. I didn't come here to ask for anything, I said, my voice steady now. Not forgiveness. Not sympathy. I just needed you to see the whole picture. I closed the folder, slid it back into my bag, and stood tall. Now that you know, I can walk away without carrying your confusion. You don't get to rewrite the story in whispers. I've said what needed saying. Daniel didn't move. He looked smaller now, his confidence crumpled. No one stood to defend him. Not this time. I turned and walked to the door. As I opened it, I heard Kara's voice, soft but firm. Thank you, Elena. I didn't look back. I didn't need applause or validation. I'd just taken the final piece of my truth and placed it in full view. Let them do with it what they wanted. My part was done. I didn't speak to Daniel the entire drive home. He didn't try either, which somehow made it worse. The silence between us wasn't just uncomfortable now, it was conclusive. When we stepped inside the house, he lingered in the doorway like he didn't know if he was still welcome. Maybe he didn't want to ask. I walked past him and headed straight for the kitchen, needing the illusion of routine. A glass of water. A deep breath. Something to keep me from unraveling. He followed, eventually, his footsteps dragging like a man carrying a weight he could no longer pretend didn't exist. Elena, he started, but I raised a hand before he could continue. I don't want another half excuse. No more, I didn't mean to. I want the full truth. All of it. Right here, right now. Or we're done speaking for good. He hesitated, then sank into the chair across from me, elbows on the table, head in his hands. It started 3 years ago. Lucas had just failed with that pet accessory site. He was in debt, desperate. He said he needed a way to rebuild. Said he had this idea, crypto consulting. He made it sound like he had clients lined up. All he needed was backing. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. And you decided to be that backing. With our money. He said it was temporary. Just until the first payouts came through. I pulled $5,000 at first. I thought I could replace it before you noticed. But you didn't, I said coldly. No, he admitted, because there were no payouts. There were no clients. Just a fake website and a bunch of promises. By the time I realized it, he'd already roped in Kara and Nate. I tried to confront him, but he flipped it, said if I bailed, they'd lose everything. Said I owed him. My stomach turned. Owed him for what? Daniel hesitated, then looked up. His eyes were hollow. Years ago, before you and I got serious, I worked for a startup. I screwed up. Fudged some invoices to make our quarter look better. Lucas found out. Instead of turning me in, he told the board it was his mistake. They fired him quietly, and I kept my job. I owed him after that. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man I married with the man in front of me. You've been carrying his guilt like it was a debt. But instead of repaying him yourself, you used me. You used us. He didn't argue. I trusted you, I whispered. I built a life with you, gave you the benefit of the doubt, shared everything. And you let me be the last to know. Daniel exhaled shakily. I didn't know how to stop it without losing everything. My job, my family, you. You lost me anyway, I said, voice sharper than I intended. Not because you made a mistake. Because you made a series of choices that said I didn't matter. He nodded slowly. You're right. I turned away, blinking back the sting behind my eyes. I wasn't going to cry. Not again. This wasn't grief, it was clarity. The kind that settles into your bones when the last lie finally surfaces. I can't fix what I did, Daniel said quietly, but I'll accept whatever you decide. If you want me to leave, I will. His words hung in the air. A version of me, an older version, might have clung to that as redemption. Might have softened at the humility, mistaken it for change. But not anymore. I'd learned the difference between remorse and transformation. I looked back at him. Why didn't you come clean when your family tried to vote on my money? Why didn't you stop them? His face twisted with guilt. Because if I stopped them, it would have meant telling the truth. And I wasn't ready to lose their respect. I laughed bitterly. So you sold mine instead. The silence that followed felt final. Like a closing curtain. I stepped toward the door. I want you out of the house. Tonight. Take what you need, but be gone before morning. He stood slowly, then nodded. Okay. I waited until I heard him begin packing before I allowed myself to sit at the kitchen table, where the weight of everything caught up to me. The lies. The months of suspicion I'd tried to ignore. The nights I'd convinced myself he was just tired or stressed, when really he was spinning a web behind my back. But underneath it all, something else stirred. Not rage. Not sorrow. Relief. I wasn't unsure anymore. I wasn't waiting for clarity or signs. The truth had landed. And though it had knocked the breath from me, it had also freed me. I didn't need to scream or demand apologies. I had the evidence. I had the facts. And soon, I'd have the distance. Daniel had mistaken my silence all these years for compliance. What he failed to realize was that silence, true silence, comes when you're done fighting. And I was done. I didn't say a word when I handed Daniel the divorce petition. I just set the crisp stack of papers in front of him on the kitchen table and watched as his eyes darted down to the signature line. His hand hovered there for a second, not quite touching it, not quite rejecting it either. Majority rules, right? I said flatly. He didn't respond. Maybe he was waiting for me to soften. Maybe he thought this was still part of the performance, another moment he could talk his way out of. But I had no performance left. I wasn't here to debate or discuss. I was here to finalize. You made decisions for us without me, I continued. You gambled with our future. I'm just giving you the vote you were too cowardly to let me cast. Daniel blinked, looking up at me like a man trying to find a trace of the person he once counted on. I thought we'd work through this. I scoffed. You mean, after I absorbed the damage and moved on quietly? He opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. No, not this time. I've already spoken to my attorney. The prenup holds. The amendments are valid. What's yours is yours, and what's mine, thankfully, is still mine. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said, voice low. I thought maybe if I could just make it work, if one thing finally worked, it would undo the rest. You don't undo betrayal with success, I said. You just delay the fallout. His face crumpled at that, the reality finally hitting. He reached for the pen I had already placed beside the paperwork, then paused. I don't know what to say, he murmured. There's nothing left to say, I replied. Just sign. And he did. I walked out of the room, grabbing my bag and keys with the kind of focus you have when your heart has already disconnected. I didn't need him to beg. I didn't need closure. What I needed was space. Distance. Breath. I stepped out into the late afternoon light, crisp and golden. It was the kind of light that made everything look cleaner, like the world had been polished just for me. I didn't look back as I walked to my car. He didn't follow. For once, he understood what silence truly meant. And this time, no one in his family tried to stop me. No calls. No texts. No sudden house visits begging for reconciliation. Maybe they'd finally seen enough. Or maybe they realized their influence only ever worked when I allowed it. I had taken that power back the moment I drew a line in ink. It was quiet as I drove. Not the suffocating quiet I'd lived in for the past year, but a freeing one. The kind that comes after a storm, when the sky is still heavy but the wind has finally calmed. I rolled down the windows and let the air whip through my hair, tears streaming down my face, not from grief, but from something closer to relief. For so long, I'd been trying to protect everyone. Daniel. His reputation. His family's image. Our marriage. But no one had protected me. And I was done being the safety net. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the road guide me. I ended up at the park down by the marina, the one Daniel never liked because the parking lot was always full and the coffee shop played live music on weekends. I parked, got out, and walked until I found a bench facing the water. It was there, with the sun brushing the horizon and the scent of salt in the air, that I finally exhaled. I thought of everything I had endured. The manipulation. The gaslighting masked as concern. The pressure to bend, to accommodate, to remain quiet. And how close I came to accepting that as love. But love doesn't ask you to shrink. Love doesn't vote your boundaries away behind your back. Love doesn't forge your name to fund someone else's dreams. No, what I had lived through wasn't love, it was illusion. Fragile. Conditional. Built on convenience and secrecy. I pulled my phone from my bag and opened the folder I'd titled Freedom. It had a scan of the divorce papers, emails from my attorney, screenshots of the credit reports now flagged for fraud. Each file was a brick in the foundation of my new life. One where I was no longer the keeper of someone else's mess. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology. I just needed out. And now I had it. As the wind picked up and the sun dipped lower, I let the silence settle into my bones. Not the kind of silence born from fear or waiting, but the kind you earn. The kind that says, you made it through. You burned it down, and still, here you are. Whole. Clear. And finally, free. The news came quietly, just a single line from Kara in a text message the following week. Lucas is gone. No fanfare. No drama. Just gone. He'd emptied his small checking account, left his apartment, and vanished. No forwarding address, no voicemail. Even his social media had been wiped clean like he'd never existed, just a digital ghost slipping out through the back door after the house had finally caught fire. Kara said she wasn't surprised. She'd seen it coming the moment the lies started to unravel, thread by thread. I think he knew it was over, she told me later when we met for coffee. The power, the charm, it stopped working. He never sticks around when that happens. I nodded, staring into the swirl of my latte. Predators don't linger where there's no prey. She didn't argue. She'd already filed a small claim suit, determined to get at least some of her money back. Nate was doing the same. George and Elaine, surprisingly, weren't defending him. Not anymore. The web Lucas wove had collapsed too thoroughly to deny, and even they had grown weary of explaining his messes away. Daniel, according to Kara, had moved back into the guest room at his parents' house. George had him helping around the property, earning back trust, as if that could be itemized or repaired like drywall. I didn't ask how he was. I didn't want to know. I was done carrying weight that was never mine. My own life had become remarkably quiet. I filed the final divorce paperwork 3 days after Daniel signed. The clerk at the courthouse looked surprised when I handed it over so calmly, like she was expecting tears or a story. I didn't give her either. Just the documents, in order, with a clear name signed at the bottom. Thanks to the prenup, there was no contesting the division. The house stayed mine. The accounts stayed untouched. And everything Daniel and Lucas had drained behind my back? That was already marked as fraud, flagged, and reported. I wasn't letting the damage define me. I was documenting it, owning it, rebuilding past it. The first night alone in the house felt strange, but not sad. It was silent in the way that felt intentional, like every corner finally had room to breathe again. I walked through each room slowly, barefoot, touching the walls like I was reacquainting myself with a friend I hadn't truly seen in years. I opened windows. I lit candles. I made pasta at midnight just because I could. No checking someone else's mood. No tiptoeing around tension. No waiting for someone else's choices to catch up with me. I finally felt the weight slide off my chest, not all at once, but gradually, like armor unbuckling after battle. Over the next week, I cleaned with purpose. Not just scrubbing counters or vacuuming floors, but deep work. I boxed up old things, donated items that belonged to a life I no longer wanted to carry. I replaced sheets. I moved my office desk closer to the window. I threw away mugs that reminded me of whispered arguments and late-night guilt. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the space. The house began to feel like mine again. Not just legally, but emotionally. Spiritually. People talk about freedom like it's a leap. A dramatic act. But in reality, it's often quiet. Subtle. It's waking up and realizing you don't have to hold your breath. It's choosing your own meals. It's sitting with yourself and not feeling alone. I started sleeping better. Longer, deeper. For the first time in months, I didn't dream of accusations or anxious voices. Just silence. And when I woke, I didn't brace for anything. No vote. No deception. No mask to wear. Just me. One afternoon, I went through the last envelope from my attorney. Inside were duplicates of the final court filings, a statement confirming the dissolution was complete, and a small note she'd handwritten in the corner. You did everything right. Rest now. I read it 3 times. I hadn't realized how much I needed that acknowledgement. I wasn't perfect. I'd missed signs. I'd rationalized. I'd stayed longer than I should have. But I had also stood my ground, drawn lines, protected myself. When everyone else tried to make me doubt my instincts, I trusted them anyway. That mattered. That was enough. Later that week, I walked past the guest room where Daniel used to keep his mess of receipts and business cards. The door had stayed shut since he left. This time, I opened it wide. I took everything that belonged to him, files, boxes, cords, forgotten chargers, and packed it neatly into 3 labeled bins. I dropped them off at his parents' house without a word. I left them on the porch, rang the bell, and walked away. I didn't need to see his face. I didn't need another conversation. Closure wasn't something he could give me. I'd already given it to myself. That night, I stood in my kitchen with a glass of wine and no background noise. No music. No television. Just the soft tick of the wall clock and the rhythmic thrum of my own heartbeat. The version of me who tolerated the manipulation was gone. The woman who remained had roots. And she didn't need a vote to move forward. She already had.